When I saw my husband scrolling through my phone, my heart skipped a beat, not from the fear of being caught, but because I knew exactly what he would find. The messages. The ones I had forgotten to delete. I reached for the phone, trying to snatch it from his hands, but he instinctively pulled back and kept reading. I watched his face change, line by line, word by word, and I felt my world begin to collapse. Yes, now he would know the truth. But not the whole truth. His fingers trembled as he scrolled further, and I knew he was seconds away from seeing the one message that would destroy everything. The message that would erase every lie I had told, or maybe, make everything even harder to explain. Suddenly, the phone buzzed in his hand. A new notification popped up. I saw the name of the sender, and I watched as the color drained from his face. He froze. Didn't blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, a reflex I hadn't outgrown since childhood. The nerves, the panic, the realization of what I had done all hit me at once. I could hear the way his breathing changed from across the room. This was the moment I had dreaded the most. Because 3 months ago, I made a mistake. One that changed everything. And now I didn't know how to fix it. But let me tell you how it all started. Before I reveal the secret I tried so desperately to keep buried, tell me, have you ever hidden something so deeply, only for it to come crashing out anyway? Leave a comment with where you're watching from, and answer honestly, have you ever had a secret you couldn't keep? I don't think I ever planned to be that kind of woman. You know the kind. The ones who smile through their marriages while keeping secrets tucked into the folds of their purses, hidden behind passwords and half-hearted kisses. I used to look at those stories on TV with a mix of judgment and pity, thinking, how could anyone live like that? But life has a way of making you eat your words. Slowly. Quietly. Until one day, you wake up and realize you've become someone you swore you'd never be. It started, as most disasters do, not with a bang, but with silence. The kind of silence that stretches between two people who used to laugh over burnt toast and early morning messes. My husband and I had been married for over 2 decades. He was steady, predictable, kind. A good man, by all definitions. And yet, I felt invisible in my own home. It wasn't dramatic. There were no big fights, no slammed doors. Just the soft erosion of attention, the way he'd ask about my day while staring at his laptop screen, or how his hand barely brushed mine anymore when we walked side by side. I remember the first time I noticed it. I had spent the afternoon rearranging the living room, nothing huge, just something to break the routine. When he came home, I waited for him to say something. Anything. He didn't even look up. He walked past the couch I'd moved, past the new photo frame on the table, straight to the fridge. And I stood there, holding my breath like a fool. That night, I cried in the bathroom, not because he hurt me, but because I finally admitted to myself how lonely I felt. How small. Then Caleb started coming around more often. My husband's best friend since college. He was always charming in that way men like him are, casual, confident, a little reckless. I never paid much attention to him before. He was just part of the furniture, someone who laughed loudly and drank our wine without asking. But lately, he'd been staying longer, lingering in the kitchen even after my husband went to bed, offering to help with little things, carrying groceries, fixing the cabinet hinge, walking the dog if I was too tired. At first, it felt kind. Generous. Harmless. But it wasn't. It became something else the day I caught him watching me while I bent to load the dishwasher. Not watching, staring. I felt it, the heat of his gaze, and for a moment, I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I didn't scold him. I just kept working, pretending I didn't notice, but my hands were trembling. And that was the moment, I think. The moment I realized that someone saw me. Not as a wife, or a cook, or a woman past her prime. Just me. A woman. The weeks that followed were a slow drip of temptation. It wasn't a leap, it was 1,000 little steps. A compliment here. A glance there. Him telling me that I looked younger than ever. Me brushing it off with a smile that lingered too long. I started putting on lipstick before he came over. Nothing bold. Just a little color. Something soft, like coral or rose. Something that said, I'm still here. My husband didn't notice. Of course he didn't. He was too busy with his spreadsheets, his emails, his routines. He didn't notice the new dress I bought. Or that I started walking differently. But Caleb did. He noticed everything. And that, perhaps, is what broke me first. There was a night, mid-May, I think, when the rain came suddenly and the power flickered. I lit candles, made tea. My husband was working late, again. Caleb stopped by uninvited, soaking wet, holding 2 bottles of wine and that crooked smile of his. We sat at the kitchen table like teenagers skipping class. He told me a story about their college days, about how my husband used to be wild, unpredictable, passionate. I laughed, because that man was a stranger to me now. And then Caleb looked at me, really looked. And said, he doesn't deserve you. I froze. The words were simple, but they shattered something I'd kept locked up tight. I wanted to scream, don't say that. But I didn't. Because a part of me believed it. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering every moment. Every brush of his hand, every lingering look. I told myself it was harmless. Just attention. Just fantasy. But the truth was curling around my ankles, dragging me somewhere I wasn't ready to go. The next morning, I opened my wardrobe and reached for the red blouse I hadn't worn in years. It was too bold. Too tight. Too obvious. I wore it anyway. Because deep down, I knew, this wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not until I crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And part of me wanted to. The morning after that stormy night felt like walking through fog, each step oddly weightless and yet somehow crushing. I woke earlier than usual, the silence in the house too perfect, too careful. My husband's side of the bed was still untouched, his pillow cold. He had stayed overnight at a business partner's place, something I hadn't questioned. In fact, I welcomed the space, the absence. I needed it. But now, in the sharp light of morning, with coffee in my hand and the scent of last night's candle still lingering in the air, I questioned everything. What had started as harmless attention had shifted. Something unspoken had passed between us, and though nothing happened, nothing truly irreversible, it still echoed in every breath I took. I spent the early hours rearranging small things around the house. I wiped the already clean counters, folded the blanket on the couch twice, adjusted the angle of a picture frame by a degree no one else would notice. That restlessness had a name, though I wouldn't dare speak it. Then came the knock. Not loud. Just 3 quick taps. Casual, like it could have been the postman or a neighbor. But I knew. I felt it in my chest. When I opened the door, Caleb stood there holding a bakery bag and 2 coffees. Thought you might want breakfast, he said. I nodded and stepped aside. I told myself I should send him away. That I should close the door and pretend like nothing had ever happened between us, no looks, no tension, no sleepless night. But I didn't. We sat at the dining table, sunlight cutting long shapes across the hardwood floor. I noticed how his sleeves were rolled up and how his forearms rested against the wood, casual, almost too familiar. There was nothing loud in his presence, just a quiet insistence that filled the room. He spoke first, about mundane things, traffic, work, the way the bakery line had been absurdly long for a weekday. I nodded in the right places, added my own shallow responses. But our words were placeholders. They weren't what mattered. And then it happened. Not premeditated. Not passionate. Not poetic. We kissed. No build-up. No slow lean-in. It was like gravity had simply shifted between us, and suddenly we were pulled together. A short kiss, almost abrupt, but it unraveled something. Like the first crack in a dam. I pulled away. He didn't chase. He just looked at me, calm, expectant, like this had been inevitable. I stood up and excused myself to the kitchen, pretending I needed to refill my coffee, though the mug was nearly full. My hands trembled as I gripped the counter. He stayed a few more minutes, sensing I needed space. Then he left, without pressing, without a word about what had happened. Just a light touch on my shoulder as he passed me on his way out. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. The rest of the day unfolded like I was floating through it. I couldn't focus on anything, emails, laundry, reading. The world felt faded at the edges. That one kiss had stirred something so deeply buried I didn't even recognize myself. When my husband came home that evening, everything felt louder. His voice, his footsteps, even the sound of his keys on the kitchen counter. I greeted him like usual, asked about his day. He kissed my cheek distractedly and disappeared into his office. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door. I wondered how many times we had gone through this exact dance, two people coexisting, orbiting the same space without touching. It hadn't always been this way. But somewhere between paying bills and discussing grocery lists, we had become polite strangers. That night, I lay in bed beside him, wide awake. I listened to the rhythm of his breathing and tried to remember the last time we had touched with intention, not out of routine. I couldn't. My mind replayed Caleb's hand on my cheek, the stillness of the moment after our kiss, the heaviness in my chest. I hated myself for it. And I longed for it at the same time. The next day, everything resumed like normal. Except it wasn't. I saw Caleb again, briefly. He passed by the house in the late afternoon, waved from the sidewalk as I watered the front garden. His smile was easy, like nothing was different. But I felt it, that lingering current, the weight of what had been set in motion. That night, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, dressing with someone else in mind. I picked out a blouse I knew fit snug around the waist and let my hair down instead of tying it in the usual bun. Not for my husband. Not even necessarily for Caleb. But for myself. Because for the first time in years, I felt seen. And that terrified me. Later, I tried to focus on cooking dinner. The sauce burned slightly. The pasta overcooked. My husband barely noticed. He ate distractedly, scrolling on his phone between bites. He asked how my day had been. I told him it was fine. He nodded, didn't look up. It was that small. That simple. And yet it felt like the loudest silence in the world. That night, I sat outside on the back porch long after the dishes were done. The air was cool, carrying the smell of distant jasmine and something I couldn't name. I watched the shadows stretch across the yard and wondered how many women had found themselves in this exact moment, caught between the safety of what they knew and the thrill of what they feared. I didn't sleep. I told him I had a headache. He mumbled something supportive, already half asleep. I stayed on the porch until the sky began to shift toward dawn, pink and bruised. Something had begun. And I no longer knew how to stop it. The following morning was wrapped in stillness, the kind that feels too precise to be accidental. I opened the window in the kitchen to let in the early breeze, but the air outside seemed no fresher than what I had carried in my lungs all night. The ache behind my eyes reminded me I hadn't slept, not really. I had drifted, floated between guilt and confusion, but never found rest. I moved through the house as if underwater. Everything felt slower, heavier. The clink of the mug against the counter echoed louder than it should have. The clock ticked with precision, yet time refused to pass. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have clarity. I had only this persistent thrum under my ribs, like something was waiting to happen. By mid-morning, I tried to distract myself with chores. I scrubbed the bathroom tile, changed the bedding, organized the pantry. Each task was a grasp at normalcy. I wanted routine to pull me out of myself, to pull me away from the memory of that kiss. From the weight of what it meant and what it didn't. Because a part of me still wanted to pretend it was harmless. But by noon, I gave up on pretending. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my phone. His name sat quietly in the message thread. No new texts. No emojis. Just the last exchange, a simple thanks for breakfast. Nothing out of place. And yet everything between the lines pulsed with what had gone unsaid. I typed and erased at least 5 different messages. Everything sounded too formal or too needy. I finally settled on, "Are you around today?" Short. Neutral. Easy to deny. His reply came 3 minutes later. Maybe. Why? I stared at the screen. Then, fingers shaking slightly, I typed, "I just need to talk." The bubble blinked once, then stopped. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. No response. I stood up, poured the rest of my coffee down the drain, and stared at the brown swirl circling the sink. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. Maybe I wanted him to say it didn't mean anything. Or that it did. Maybe I just needed someone to carry the weight with me, even briefly. Late afternoon brought an unexpected knock at the door. Not Caleb. My husband. He had come home early. I wasn't ready. Not for him, not for the sudden shift in rhythm. My face must have shown something because he tilted his head, squinting slightly, asking if I was okay. I nodded too quickly, offered a vague excuse about not feeling well, and stepped aside to let him in. He walked past me with the familiarity of years, and yet I flinched internally at every step he took. Every sound he made seemed to scrape against my nerves. He dropped his bag on the floor near the couch and began telling me about an annoying client at work, laughing at his own frustration. I smiled and hummed at the right moments, but inside, I was somewhere else. I watched him while he talked. The way his shoulders slumped slightly from fatigue, how he rubbed the back of his neck when he was thinking. These were the things I used to find endearing. Now they felt like distant echoes. I hated myself for thinking that. For feeling so far from him while he stood only 3 feet away. After dinner, he retreated to his office, and I stood in the kitchen with the dirty plates, unmoving. I didn't clean them. I didn't do anything. I just stood there until the light outside dimmed into early dusk. My phone vibrated once. I looked down. Caleb, come by later. Just for a minute. No explanation. No greeting. Just an open door. I didn't respond. Not immediately. Instead, I paced the hallway. I touched the framed photos on the wall, the one from our 20th anniversary trip to the lake. We were smiling in that picture, sunburnt, arms wrapped around each other, both of us squinting at the sun. I tried to remember what it felt like to be her. That woman. That version of myself. But she wasn't me anymore. I told my husband I needed to run to the store. He barely looked up from his screen. Okay. Need anything? I shook my head. And then I left. The drive felt longer than usual, though the streets were mostly empty. I turned the radio off because even music felt like noise I couldn't handle. When I pulled up in front of Caleb's building, I hesitated. I sat in the car for several minutes, watching my fingers on the steering wheel, watching the streetlights flicker against the windshield. Part of me screamed to turn back. To go home and forget. But another part, the part one no longer fully trusted, was already climbing out of the car. He opened the door before I knocked. He had been waiting. The apartment was dimly lit, not in a romantic way, but in a way that felt personal. Like he hadn't tried to impress or prepare anything. He simply let me in. We sat on opposite sides of the couch. The distance felt deliberate. "I shouldn't have kissed you," he said quietly. I nodded, but my chest tightened. "Then why did you?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking down at his hands. "Because I saw it in your face. You needed someone to remind you." "Remind me of what?" "That you're still allowed to feel something." I didn't respond. I didn't know how. The truth sat heavy in the air between us. He looked at me, really looked. Not like someone trying to seduce or manipulate. Just a man who had crossed a line and was unsure what came next. "I didn't plan any of this," he said. "But I won't pretend I don't feel it." My eyes welled with tears I didn't expect. Not because of what he said, but because I believed him. And that made everything worse. I stood up, suddenly needing space. I walked to the window, stared out at the blurred lights of the city. "I don't know what I'm doing," I whispered. "Neither do I." We didn't touch. Not this time. When I finally left, the air outside felt colder than it should have. I sat in the car for a long time again, but this time, I didn't cry. I just breathed. When I returned home, my husband was asleep on the couch, the TV still humming quietly. I covered him with a blanket, turned off the lamp, and stood there watching him sleep. I wasn't ready to face what I had become. But I knew now, I had already crossed the line. And there was no going back. I woke up the next morning feeling like my body had gone through a storm, even though I hadn't moved much through the night. My limbs were stiff, my head heavy, and my eyes sore. Sleep had come late and only in fragments. Every time I started drifting off, I'd jolt awake, heart pounding, as if I'd forgotten something urgent. There was no relief when morning light filtered through the blinds, only the slow dread of facing the day. My husband was already gone, a note on the table telling me he had early meetings and would be back late. It was the kind of note I used to appreciate, those small courtesies that kept routines intact. But now it just felt like another piece of distance between us, carefully folded and signed with his name. I sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee I didn't enjoy, staring at the garden outside. The rose bush near the fence had started blooming again. I remember when we planted it together. He dug the hole, I held the pot, both of us laughing when the soil splashed onto my shirt. That memory felt like it belonged to another version of me. A woman I used to be before all this. Around mid-morning, I tried distracting myself with mundane tasks again, folding laundry, wiping windows, answering emails. Nothing held my attention. Every action felt mechanical. And always, just beneath the surface, Caleb's voice from the night before echoed through my thoughts. That you're still allowed to feel something. That sentence clung to me like a second skin. It both justified and condemned everything I had done since that first shift. I kept thinking, was that what I'd needed all along? Just someone to make me feel again? Was that the excuse I was going to hide behind now? Around noon, I received a message from Caleb. Just one word. Tonight? I didn't reply right away. I didn't even open the thread. I set my phone face down and walked to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to listen to the silence in the house, hoping it would bring clarity. It didn't. By late afternoon, my husband texted me. He would be staying late, something about an unexpected meeting. I replied with a simple okay. No questions, no emojis, no warmth. Just a cold confirmation that I was now entirely alone for the evening. I stared at myself in the mirror for a long time before I got ready. I didn't put on anything special, but I still took longer than usual. Brushed my hair more carefully. Dabbed on a bit of perfume, not too strong. Just something light that made me feel less invisible. The irony wasn't lost on me. I wasn't doing it for love. I was doing it for the feeling of being noticed. When I arrived at Caleb's apartment, the door was already slightly ajar, as if he had been expecting me to come without needing to knock. I hesitated for a moment before stepping in. The room was dimly lit again, but not dark. There was no music, no wine. Just him, sitting on the couch, reading something on his phone. He looked up as I entered and gave a quiet nod. We didn't say anything right away. Words had started to feel like placeholders between us, insufficient and heavy. I sat on the opposite end of the couch. He didn't move closer. For a few minutes, we just sat in silence, both of us waiting for the other to speak. Eventually, I broke it. This can't keep happening, I said. My voice was steady, but my hands betrayed me, clenching into the fabric of my jeans. He nodded, but didn't argue. I know. I'm married, I continued, not because he needed reminding, but because I did. He looked down at his hands. It's not that simple. It should be. He didn't speak for a moment, then said, Then why are you here? I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. Because I didn't have a clear reason. Not one that made sense. Not one I was proud of. I was there because something inside me had already unraveled, and I didn't know how to stitch it back together. Because loneliness can be louder than guilt. Because I was tired of being invisible. I don't know, I finally said. I needed to not feel like a ghost for a little while. That sentence hung in the air for a long time. He leaned back, exhaled slowly, and looked at me, not with the hunger I'd started to expect, but with something quieter. Maybe pity. Maybe understanding. Maybe both. I don't want to be the reason your life falls apart, he said. I almost laughed. It's already falling apart. We're just pretending it isn't. He nodded. So what do we do now? I don't know. Neither of us moved closer. There was no touch, no glance charged with tension. Just the stillness of two people caught in a choice neither one wanted to claim responsibility for. Eventually, I stood up. I should go. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't walk me to the door. I left the apartment in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down harder than anything we could have done or confessed. Driving home felt like moving through molasses. Every red light stretched longer than usual. Every familiar corner looked foreign. When I pulled into our driveway, I sat in the car for several minutes before getting out. The house was dark, quiet, untouched. I walked inside, locked the door behind me, and leaned against it. The emptiness wrapped itself around me, colder than I expected. I stood in the kitchen and drank water, staring at the empty space where my husband usually placed his keys. My chest ached, not from love, not from loss, but from knowing that I had done this. All of it. Not alone. But not entirely against my will either. Later that night, I lay in bed, the ceiling above me swimming in soft shadows from the streetlights outside. My husband still hadn't returned. He had sent another message, "Don't wait up." I didn't. But I also didn't sleep. I listened to every sound, real or imagined. The creak of the floorboards. The ticking of the bathroom clock. The quiet hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Every noise a reminder that this house still stood, still held us both, even as everything inside it threatened to collapse. Somewhere deep in my chest, something settled, and something else began to fray. There was no undoing it now. I had crossed a line. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to go back. The week unfolded like a tightly wound string unraveling too fast. Every morning, I woke up with a sense of heaviness I couldn't shake off. There was no confrontation, no dramatic shift, but I could feel something changing in the air around me. Like a current pulling me in a direction I wasn't prepared for, but no longer had the strength, or will, to resist. My husband remained his usual self. Courteous, predictable, mild. He asked about my day, complimented dinner, reminded me to water the plants on the patio. But even his kindness, once comforting, had started to feel like obligation dressed in familiarity. We existed in parallel lines, close but never touching. I began noticing how often we avoided each other's gaze. How rarely our fingers brushed. How even in the same room, we moved as if there were invisible walls between us. I couldn't tell if he sensed the distance or simply accepted it. Maybe it had crept in so gradually that neither of us realized until it was already too wide to cross. By Thursday, the house felt colder. The light seemed paler. The silence, sharper. That afternoon, while sorting laundry, I found an old sweater of mine tucked behind a stack of towels. I hadn't worn it in years. I held it to my chest, pressed my nose into the fabric, and closed my eyes. For a second, I was back in a time when I didn't carry the weight of secrets. When I didn't need someone else's attention to feel real. The sensation lasted only a moment before dissolving under the weight of now. Later that evening, Caleb texted me again. Meet me? Just 2 words. No time, no place. But I knew exactly what he meant. I didn't answer right away. I watched the message glow on the screen as my husband walked into the kitchen behind me. He asked if I needed anything from the store, said he was planning a late run. I shook my head and smiled, a tight curve of my lips that didn't quite reach my eyes. After he left, I stood in the living room for a while, not moving, not thinking. Then I grabbed my coat, my keys, and walked out without responding to the message. I didn't need to. I knew where he'd be. The sky had turned a soft gray, that in-between light where day fades before night commits. I found Caleb near the park, sitting on the same bench we'd passed dozens of times over the years. The sight of him stirred a mixture of anticipation and regret I couldn't articulate. He didn't speak when I approached. Just offered a quiet nod and shifted to make room. I sat beside him, not too close, not too far. For a long moment, we said nothing. The wind carried the scent of damp leaves and distant smoke. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the far side of the playground. Somewhere, a dog barked. The world kept turning. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said eventually. I wasn't either. He looked at me, and I felt the weight of his gaze, but I didn't return it. I stared ahead, at the bare branches, at the way the light played off the surface of the pond. I've been thinking, he said. About us. I inhaled slowly. There is no us. Not really. He didn't argue. That, somehow, hurt more than if he had. But there's something, he said. And it's not going away. I swallowed hard, trying to force down the lump in my throat. It has to. Why? Because I have a life. A husband. Because this can't keep going. And yet you're here. His words weren't cruel. Just true. I finally turned to face him. His expression was unreadable, not soft, not stern. Just honest. We kissed, I said quietly. And we crossed something. I don't even know what to call it. But I can't do this again. He nodded, slowly, as if absorbing the words fully. We kissed, he repeated. But that's not all, is it? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because he was right. The kiss was only the surface. The real betrayal had been brewing long before lips ever touched. It lived in the moments we stole, in the way I came alive under his gaze, in the things I stopped saying to my husband because they had already found a home in someone else's silence. We sat like that for a long time, two people on a bench, surrounded by the noise of life moving forward, while we stayed suspended. Eventually, I stood up. I need to go, I said. He didn't stop me. As I walked away, I didn't look back. The drive home felt surreal. I replayed every word in my mind, every breath, every pause. The decision to step away felt right, even as my chest tightened with loss. I told myself I was strong for walking away. But the truth was, I felt hollow. When I got home, my husband was already back. He was sitting at the dining table, flipping through a grocery receipt, squinting under the kitchen light. He looked up when I entered, smiled faintly, and said, "Hey, I got that tea you like." I nodded, my throat too tight to respond. We moved through the evening like always. Dishes clinked, the television hummed in the background, our footsteps filled the quiet. But something had shifted in me. Something final. That night, as I lay beside him, I watched his face in the glow of the bedside lamp. His eyelashes fluttered slightly in sleep. His hand rested loosely near my hip. I studied him like a stranger, trying to remember the last time I felt close to this man who had once been my whole world. And I wondered if he ever looked at me the way Caleb had. If he would ever notice what was changing right in front of him. I turned off the light. The darkness settled over me like a verdict. We kissed. And nothing would ever be the same again. The weekend arrived like an overdue storm, not with lightning and thunder, but with a slow, creeping heaviness that settled into every corner of my body. There was nothing extraordinary about the day itself. The weather was unremarkable, the sky dull and flat, as if even it didn't have the energy to take a side. But inside me, something buzzed quietly. An anticipation. A dread. My husband suggested we have dinner with friends, old college friends of his, ones I had never been particularly close to but had always played the part for. I agreed without hesitation. Saying no would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer. So I smiled and nodded and pretended like the thought of small talk and shared appetizers didn't make my skin crawl. I dressed more carefully than usual, choosing a blouse I hadn't worn in years. It was modest, but it fit well. I wore earrings, curled my hair, even applied a bit of blush. My husband noticed. He said I looked beautiful. I thanked him with a smile I didn't feel. The compliment landed like a delayed echo, too late, too practiced, too safe. When we arrived at the restaurant, the table was already half full. Familiar laughter, shared memories I wasn't part of. I greeted everyone with warmth I manufactured on the drive over. We all slid into our places, the server took drink orders, and soon the evening unfolded like countless others had before. But I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting toward the entrance. I told myself I wasn't looking for anyone in particular. That it was just habit. But every time the door opened, my breath caught slightly. And then I saw him. Caleb walked in with a calmness that made my stomach tighten. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't part of this circle. But there he was, invited by someone, I guessed. Maybe one of the other husbands. Maybe just coincidence. Maybe not. He saw me. Of course he did. And then he smiled, briefly, like a secret. Then he walked over and greeted my husband first, clapping him on the back, laughing at some inside joke. He didn't sit near me. He took a seat across the table, diagonal, close enough to see me clearly, far enough not to make it obvious. I tried to act normal. I laughed when everyone laughed. I ate my food. I made polite conversation. But my hands trembled every time I lifted my glass. My skin burned under his gaze. And he looked. Not constantly. Not boldly. Just enough. Small glances. Subtle. Timed perfectly. At one point, my husband leaned in and whispered something about the wine being too bitter. I turned to respond, and in that moment, I felt it, Caleb's foot brushing lightly against mine under the table. I froze. It wasn't accidental. I knew the difference. And he didn't move it. My husband didn't notice. He kept talking, something about work deadlines and weekend plans. I nodded along, my heartbeat deafening in my ears. Eventually, I shifted my leg just slightly, enough to end the contact. But I didn't look at Caleb. I couldn't. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I barely remembered what anyone said. Laughter sounded distant. Food tasted bland. My body was present, but my mind was spiraling, trying to make sense of how quickly the ground had shifted beneath me again. As we stood to leave, Caleb approached me. Not directly. Just close enough. He handed me my coat, something he never would have done before. Nice seeing you tonight, he said. Just loud enough for me to hear. I mumbled something back, keeping my eyes down, and followed my husband out the door. In the car, he seemed content. He talked about how good it was to see everyone, how we should host something soon. I nodded, fingers gripping the edge of my seat. When we got home, I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the closed toilet lid, stared at the tiled floor, and tried to breathe through the chaos in my chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. We had set a line. We had acknowledged it. Stepped away. But there was no clean break. No tidy ending. Every shared space, every unexpected moment could reopen the wound. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I didn't recognize. Not because I looked older or different, but because I had become a woman who was lying with every blink. Every smile. Every reply that started with "I'm fine." Later that night, when I was finally in bed, I tried to pretend everything was normal. My husband curled up beside me, his breathing soft and steady. I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand. I reached for it. A message from Caleb. 4 words. We need to talk. I didn't answer. I put the phone face down and lay still. But I didn't sleep. Because I knew what came next. And I wasn't sure I could stop it. I stared at the message on my phone until the screen dimmed and faded to black. Those 4 words sat in my chest like a stone: we need to talk. They weren't dramatic or desperate. They were simple. Direct. And terrifying. I didn't respond. I placed the phone back on the nightstand and lay still, but sleep was impossible. My mind raced in every direction, dragging me through imagined scenarios, unfinished conversations, memories I didn't want to relive. The bedroom felt too warm, the sheets too heavy, my own skin unfamiliar. Eventually, I slipped out of bed quietly and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The floor was cool beneath my feet. I didn't turn on the lights, just stood near the window, letting the soft glow of the street lamps outside paint shadows on the tile. I poured a glass of water and held it, untouched, just for something to do with my hands. I didn't want to meet him. I didn't want to hear more. But I knew I would go. Because some part of me needed it. Not closure, there was no such thing anymore. But maybe understanding. Or maybe just the illusion of control in something that had long slipped beyond it. Around 3 in the morning, I texted back. Where? The reply came within minutes. You choose. I stared at the screen, then typed. My grandmother's cottage. Tomorrow evening. It was an impulsive choice. The old family place had been left empty for years, but the keys still hung on our kitchen hook. We used to visit in the early years of our marriage, before work and responsibilities anchored us to the city. Before everything had become routine. I knew it would be empty. I knew no one would follow. I returned to bed, body exhausted but mind humming with noise. I didn't sleep. Not really. When morning came, I moved through the motions like a ghost, making coffee, folding laundry, smiling when my husband asked if I wanted to go out for brunch. I told him I had errands to run, nothing exciting. He didn't question it. He kissed my cheek and left. By late afternoon, I was on the road. The drive to the cottage took a little over an hour. The road curved through stretches of trees, patches of farmland, and long, quiet silences. I drove with the windows down, letting the air wash over me. I didn't listen to music. I needed the sound of wind and engine and my own heart beating out of rhythm. The cottage appeared just as I remembered it, small, pale, slightly crooked. The paint on the porch was peeling. The wooden swing still creaked lazily in the breeze. I parked and sat in the car for a long time, unsure what I was doing. Then I saw his car approaching through the trees. It pulled up beside mine, and for a brief second, I considered leaving. Driving away. Pretending I'd never been there. But then he stepped out, and I knew I wouldn't run. We didn't greet each other with words. We just looked, acknowledging something heavy, something unspoken. I unlocked the door and led him inside. The interior hadn't changed much. Dust coated the shelves. The air smelled faintly of old wood and dried lavender. We didn't bother with lights. The soft, fading daylight was enough. We sat in the living room, on opposite sides of the old couch. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the faded rug beneath our feet. I know I shouldn't have come to the dinner, he said. I didn't answer. I didn't know you'd be there. I didn't plan it. I believe you, I said quietly. He looked over at me. But when I saw you, everything I told myself I'd buried came rushing back. I nodded slowly. Same. He exhaled and leaned back. So what are we doing, really? I don't know. Yes, you do. His words weren't sharp. Just truthful. And I hated how right he was. I don't want to destroy my marriage, I said, voice flat. I didn't set out to become this version of myself. I know. But I also don't know how to go back. Not fully. Not after what's already happened inside me. We sat in silence for a while. The kind that presses in around your ribs and makes it hard to breathe. I'm not here to make a move, he said eventually. I'm not going to push anything. But I needed to see you. To understand if this is just something we both got swept up in, or if it's something real. I looked at him for a long time. Not the way I had in the beginning, curious, flattered, surprised. But the way you look at someone when you're trying to decide if they belong in your future or are just a chapter in your past. It was real, I said finally. But I don't know if it still is. He nodded. That's fair. I stood up, walked to the old window, and rested my hand on the frame. The glass was cool. Outside, the trees swayed slightly, their movements slow and certain. "I think I've been drifting," I said. "For years. Long before you. Long before this." He joined me by the window, keeping a respectful distance. "I didn't mean to become an anchor," he said. "You weren't. You were a mirror." We stood there in silence, watching the sun fall lower. Eventually, I turned to him. "I think we need to let this go." He met my eyes, and I saw something flicker behind them. Sadness, maybe. Or relief. Or both. I agree. There were no tears. No dramatic goodbye. Just a shared understanding that whatever had existed between us, however intense, however confusing, it had run its course. We walked outside together. The air was cooler now, tinged with the smell of pine and damp earth. He paused at his car. "If you ever need anything," he said softly. I smiled faintly. "I'll figure it out." He nodded, then got in and drove away. I stood there for a long time, watching the dust settle on the gravel road. Then I walked back into the cottage, sat on the old swing, and closed my eyes. We spent the night together. And in the morning, everything would change. The morning came quietly. The sky was layered in soft gray, not stormy but still heavy, like the world hadn't yet decided what kind of day it wanted to be. I sat on the front porch of the cottage wrapped in a thin blanket, watching the mist lift slowly off the trees. Everything felt still. For a while, I let that stillness hold me, unsure whether it was peace or numbness I was feeling. I hadn't slept. Not because I was restless, but because sleep felt unearned. My thoughts had been too loud, tangling around questions I had no answers to, drifting through memories like static. I didn't replay the night with Caleb in vivid detail. I didn't need to. The weight of it lived in my body now, in the quiet ache behind my eyes, in the stiffness in my shoulders, in the hollow space where something irreversible had settled. The sun eventually crept higher, dissolving the fog in pieces. I stood up, stretched slowly, and went back inside to clean. I wasn't sure why. No one would be returning to the cottage anytime soon. But I moved from room to room with quiet purpose, folding the blanket on the couch, washing the single mug I had used, wiping the dust from the kitchen counters with a damp towel. By noon, I locked the door behind me and drove home. The highway passed in a blur. I kept the radio off again, listening only to the rhythmic hum of tires against pavement. Every mile closer to the city felt like shedding a layer of distance I wasn't ready to give up. When I finally turned onto our street, the air around me thickened. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. The house looked the same, of course, nothing had changed in my absence. And yet everything felt unfamiliar. My husband's car was in the driveway. I took a deep breath before stepping out. My movements were slow, careful, as though trying not to trigger something fragile. Inside, I found him in the kitchen, unpacking groceries onto the counter. He looked up when I entered and smiled. "Hey. You were gone early." I nodded. "Yeah. Just needed a drive." "Everything okay?" "Yeah. Just thinking." He accepted that answer without probing further. He always did. That had once felt like trust. Now, it felt like avoidance. I offered to help with the bags, and we moved through the domestic rhythm in silence. At one point, he reached across me for the olive oil, and our arms brushed. I flinched, not visibly, but I felt it inside. That split-second jolt of guilt, of discomfort, of knowing he didn't know. The rest of the day passed in quiet routine. We ate dinner, watched a show I barely followed, folded laundry while the news murmured in the background. Every task stitched into the familiar fabric of our life, a pattern worn thin but still functional. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow circles. My husband turned in his sleep beside me, his breathing deep and even. I listened to it like I used to when we were first married, when the sound had brought me comfort. But now it just made me feel further away. Sometime around 3 a.m., I got out of bed and wandered into the living room. I sat on the couch, wrapped my arms around my knees, and let the silence press in. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. I wanted to feel something specific: shame, regret, clarity. But everything inside me was dulled, as though my emotions were underwater. I picked up my phone. No new messages. Caleb had not texted again. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or disappointed. The next few days passed much the same. My husband didn't suspect anything, at least, not openly. He kissed my cheek, told me stories about his coworkers, asked if I wanted to go hiking on the weekend. I said yes to everything. I smiled. I laughed in the right places. I participated. But I wasn't really there. And then, one afternoon, something shifted. I was cleaning out the top drawer of my desk, looking for an old receipt, when I found a photo tucked between two folders. It was from our trip to the mountains, 5 or 6 years ago. We were sitting on a rock near a stream. My husband had his arm around me. I was leaning into him, laughing at something he'd said. The sun had caught in my hair. We looked happy. Not posed. Not curated. Just happy. I sat on the floor and stared at that photo for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just looked, trying to connect that woman to the one I had become. That evening, I brought up the idea of taking a short trip together. Just the two of us. Somewhere quiet. He looked surprised, but pleased. Really, he said. Where would you want to go? I don't know yet. I think it might be good for us. He nodded slowly. Yeah. I think so too. We didn't book anything that night, but the conversation stayed with me. I went to bed feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks, not resolution, but the faintest glimmer of direction. Still, there was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't ignore. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a flicker of panic. Every time my husband reached for me, I held my breath. The fracture between who I was and who I had pretended to be had grown too wide to bridge with simple plans or good intentions. The next morning, I found myself rereading old messages. Scrolling back through texts with Caleb, searching for the moment it had all shifted. There was no single message that had started it. No one line that stood out. It had been a slow build, soft words, suggestive jokes, the kind of attention that felt harmless until it wasn't. I deleted the thread. Not out of anger. Not out of fear. But because I knew keeping it was no longer about holding on, it was about avoiding consequences. And that wasn't something I could keep doing. That night, while my husband showered, I opened a blank document on my laptop and began writing. Not to anyone. Just for myself. I wrote down everything. Every thought. Every feeling. Every choice. Every way I had justified things. Every moment I had lied, first to myself, then to him. I didn't stop until the screen was filled with words I wasn't sure I'd ever share. But writing them made them real. When I finished, I saved the file without naming it. Closed the laptop. Sat in the dark. My husband came out of the bathroom and asked if I wanted tea. I said yes. We sat in the living room, sipping from mismatched mugs, and said nothing for a long time. There were cracks in everything now. But I was finally starting to see where the light might get through. The day started like any other. There was nothing special in the sky, no omen hanging in the air, no sudden feeling that everything was about to shift. That's the thing with consequences, they don't always announce themselves. They wait, silent and patient, until you forget to be careful. I made breakfast, poured coffee, packed my husband's lunch like I had so many times before. He kissed me on the forehead as he left, a gesture so familiar it barely registered. I smiled, wished him a good day, and stood at the window for a long time after the front door closed, watching his car disappear down the street. I had errands planned for the morning, groceries, a stop at the dry cleaners, maybe a walk if the weather held. I moved through the motions methodically, trying to stay ahead of my thoughts. But even as I ticked items off the list, there was a hum beneath everything. A kind of pressure I couldn't name yet, but it built slowly, steadily. When I returned home around noon, I brought the groceries inside, placed them on the kitchen counter, and reached for my phone to check the time. That's when I saw it. His name. A notification. A message. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I felt nothing. Just a quiet, cold stillness. I opened the message. It wasn't from Caleb. It was from my husband. And it wasn't meant for me. At least, it hadn't been written with the assumption that I would read it. It was a screenshot. A photo of a conversation. Mine and Caleb's. One I thought I had deleted long ago. The message was short, only a few lines. Flirty, but not explicit. Just enough to crack the ground beneath me. Underneath the screenshot, my husband had typed, "We need to talk." I stood in the kitchen for what felt like a full minute before the world started moving again. The light from the window was too bright, the sound of the refrigerator too loud. I sat down at the table, slowly, as if trying not to wake something dangerous. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. Instead, I read the message again. He knew. Maybe not everything. But enough. The rest of the afternoon unraveled like a slow fall. I put the groceries away mechanically, though I couldn't remember where I placed most of them. I sat on the couch, staring at a muted television screen, the faces on it blurred and meaningless. My mind kept circling the same thoughts. How much did he read? What exactly did he see? Was it just one message? Or all of them? I tried to piece together a version of events that would soften the truth. One that might protect us from the worst of it. But the truth wasn't soft. It never had been. And the damage had already been done. Around 6 p.m., I heard the front door open. I didn't get up. My husband stepped inside, set down his briefcase, and walked into the living room. He stood behind me for a few seconds before speaking. "Can we sit?" I nodded. He sat on the other end of the couch, not far, not close. His face was calm, but his eyes looked tired. Not angry. Just tired. "I didn't want to read it," he said. "It just popped up." I waited. "I was looking for a recipe you sent me a while back." The search pulled up other messages too. That one with Caleb, it just happened to be in the preview. I nodded again, unable to meet his eyes. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I didn't know what to think at first. I thought maybe it was a joke. Or old. But then I looked closer. I checked the dates. I closed my eyes. "I'm not going to yell," he said. "I'm not even sure I'm angry. I feel like I've been living next to someone who wasn't really there." That hurt more than if he had screamed. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I don't want you to apologize right now. I want you to tell me the truth." So I did. Not all of it. Not every detail. But enough. I told him about the loneliness. The quiet drift that started long before Caleb. How I had felt invisible for months, maybe years, and how I had been too ashamed to say it out loud. I told him about the kiss. About the feelings I didn't understand. About how it ended. About the silence after. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finished, he sat back, rubbed his hands over his face, and let out a long breath. "I don't know what to do with this," he said. "I don't either." We sat there in the dim light, not speaking. Eventually, he stood up. "I'm going to stay at Mark's tonight. I need some space." I didn't argue. I nodded, and he walked to the bedroom to pack a bag. 10 minutes later, he left. I stood by the window, watching his car pull away, the way I had that morning. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't waiting for him to return. This time, I wasn't sure he would. The silence after he left was unlike any I had known before. It wasn't peaceful, and it wasn't empty. It had a weight to it, a shape. It filled the house like a presence. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the air conditioning, every distant car on the street outside became louder, sharper, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed we had shared for years, staring at the small indentation his pillow had left. His scent lingered faintly on the sheets. I reached for the comforter, pulled it tight around my shoulders, and sat still, barely blinking. The minutes passed without mercy. I didn't look at the clock. I didn't move. Time had no shape anymore. Eventually, I walked through the house. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe something to hold on to, maybe something to explain how it had come to this. I opened drawers. I lifted picture frames. I stood in front of the hallway mirror and tried to see the woman my husband must have seen when he read those messages. I didn't recognize her. I thought about calling him. Just to say I was sorry again. To ask where he was. To hear his voice. But I didn't. He had asked for space, and for once, I wanted to honor that. Instead, I turned off the lights and went to bed. Alone. The next few days moved strangely. The world outside continued like nothing had happened. Neighbors watered their lawns, kids rode their bikes, the mail still arrived every afternoon. But inside the house, everything had shifted. There was no music. No television. No sound of keys dropping into the bowl by the door. I made coffee in the mornings out of habit, but barely drank it. I moved slowly, cautiously, like someone walking through a crime scene afraid to disturb the evidence. Every corner held a memory. Every room echoed with absence. I checked my phone often, not for Caleb's messages. Those had stopped completely. I didn't expect to hear from him again. I checked for my husband. For something. Anything. But there was only silence. On the third day, I received a message. It was short. From him. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time before replying. "Yes." "When?" He answered within seconds. "Tonight." The hours between that message and his arrival stretched out like years. I cleaned the house even though it didn't need cleaning. I organized shelves that had been fine for months. I put on fresh sheets, not because I expected him to stay, but because the old ones felt too stained with memory. When I heard his car pull into the driveway, I froze. The door opened, softly. He stepped inside, keys in one hand, a plastic bag in the other. He looked tired. Older, somehow, even though it had only been a few days. Our eyes met, and I could tell we were both searching for signs. For direction. For something. He set the bag on the kitchen counter. "I brought your favorite soup." I nodded, my voice caught somewhere in my chest. We sat at the table. He didn't reach for my hand. I didn't reach for his. He spoke first. I've been thinking a lot. I waited. I think I missed it for a long time. Not just the messages. Everything. I think I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to admit it. I lowered my eyes. But that doesn't make it okay, he continued. I'm not excusing what happened. I want to understand it. I took a deep breath. I wasn't looking for anyone. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I know. I felt like I disappeared. And then someone looked at me like I was still here. He nodded slowly. I understand that more than you think. We sat in silence again. This time, it wasn't cruel. It wasn't heavy. It was just quiet. Do you love him? He asked. The question hung in the air like fog. No, I said. But I let myself believe I might, because it was easier than asking what was missing here. He nodded again. No flinch. No accusation. Just listening. I don't know what comes next, I whispered. Neither do I. He stood and walked to the sink, refilled his water, and turned to face me. I'm not ready to decide anything tonight. I need time. I understand. But I'm not walking away yet. My chest tightened. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He picked up his bag and walked to the door, paused, then looked back. I don't know how to forgive this. But I don't want to throw away everything either. I nodded, tears finally reaching the surface. Me neither. He left without another word. And this time, I didn't stand by the window. I sat at the table, the soup still untouched in front of me, and let the tears come. Slow, quiet, full of everything I hadn't said before. I didn't know what we were now. But we weren't broken completely. Not yet. And maybe, just maybe, there was still something left to rebuild.